All right, we're talking Dallas Cowboys football on the Ourlads Football Network and the Ourlads Football YouTube Channel. And that means RJ Ochoa is joining us, the editor-in-chief for bloggingtheboys.com. How's it going, RJ?
Going well, Greg. Great to be with you. I love seeing your face because it means football season is here and around the corner. So, like Pavlov, you're associated with, well, not like Pavlov, I guess. Unlike him, you're associated with very good things in my mind. So it's great to see you.
Very nice. I like to, that's great. I have nothing else to say. All right. So let's go ahead and get into this then, RJ. Before we do, I want to remind everybody about bloggingtheboys.com. So if you're a Cowboy fan out there, you have no idea what I'm talking about, shame on you. But tell us a little bit about it, and also tell us a little bit about the videos that you put out, which I'm assuming are streaming and also available on YouTube.
Yeah, so Blogging the Boys, SBNation's home for Dallas Cowboys content, has been since 2005. We don't sleep. We consume ourselves with this team because we're masochists at heart. And we've got articles that come out all the time, obviously, and our YouTube channel is the most subscribed to individual team channel across all of SB Nation. And so, I'm incredibly narcissistic, so it's my face that you see on there. And talking about the latest events, obviously, with the team all the time, 24/7, 365, although 366 in this leap year. And we have post-game stuff. Obviously, we have stuff looking forward to every game now that it's the kind of rhymes and rhythms of the season. Our most popular thing by far, which is a testament to today's youth, is our Madden simulations that we do every week. It's no commentary whatsoever. It's literally just a Madden simulation, and people care about that. So those are coming around the bend soon enough. It's that time of year, and I couldn't be more grateful to do it again. I've been doing this for Blogging the Boys since 2018, and all the time has flown by.
Yeah, and covering a team like the Dallas Cowboys, there's a lot of responsibility with that. So I'm sure you're happy about that too, and pleased to be the one that is the hey, you're editor-in-chief, man. You're the boss. So it starts with you. All right, and it starts with you. So let's go ahead and start this preview of the upcoming season for the Cowboys. And first of all, let's start off with any major injuries out there that we need to keep an eye on, players that are potentially not going to start the season, on the regular lineup, in the regular roster.
I would say that the most notable ones so far through half of August have been Sam Williams, obviously tore his ACL. He was the Cowboys' second-round draft pick 2 years ago. So that kind of vaulted this year's second-round draft pick, Marshawn Nealon, up the depth chart, which Ourlads does a great job of obviously letting everybody know. And as far as the current moment and the way things kind of project into the immediate future, Marshawn was the second-round draft pick this year. Tyler Guyton was the first-round draft pick. And I think it was presumed that he would ultimately be the starting left tackle, at the very least for the majority of the season, maybe not initially, you know how those things tend to go. But Chuma Edoga, who was the only real other candidate to start at left tackle, suffered a toe injury in the first preseason game and is expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks. So, again, if you didn't think that the Tyler Guyton era would begin right away, that idea kind of went out the window. I don't know if Chuma is somebody who they'll want to IR stash, they want to carry on the initial 53, whatever the case may be, just because the timeline kind of works to where he could come back sooner rather than later related to the regular season. But those are the main ones as things stand right now.
All right, and then let's talk about Mr. Did Not Report. So what's going on with CD? Of course, we've got to talk about this, we're not going to go totally in depth. You can check out Blogging the Boys for that. But what's the latest?
Yeah, I mean, I apologize for the same things being true and obvious and redundant, but I mean, he didn't report. For what it's worth, so August 14th. Of last year was the day that the team restructured Zach Martin's deal and he got what he wanted. So we're farther along here, right? We're deeper down the rabbit hole than things got with Zach. We're not quite to the place that things reached with Zeke Elliott 5 years ago. That went all the way into September, just a couple of days, but still. So this isn't unprecedented. These aren't quite uncharted waters, but this is real. This is serious. Now, for people who don't know, the Cowboys kind of split training camp. It's not quite 50-50, but they have their Oxnard portion. And then after they wrap up their kind of West Coast preseason activity, they return home to the Star in Frisco and conclude camp locally. Obviously, a lot of teams do it locally for the whole thing. They're very close to wrapping up the Oxnard portion. And I would assume at this point that CD is not going to touch the field there in California. And so that's notable. That's significant. I mean, no matter how you want to look at it. And I mean, he has the term leverage has been the most used one, obviously, as far as all content we've created all offseason because of everything. I don't know that CD has the leverage that Dak Prescott has, but he has an enormous amount. He is coming off of, for anyone who's unaware, the most statistically successful season that any wide receiver has ever had in franchise history. And he achieved all of the important marks in 16 regular season games, that Saturday night game against the Detroit Lions with the crazy, speaking of did not report, on the 2-point conversion attempt. That was, that was when he surpassed all important measures. So this is, I mean, it's a very simple thing. They let the Justin Jefferson deal get done. People can whine and complain about how Jefferson is better. This is a supply and demand world. This is the market. I mean, we've equated it to houses and cars and all sorts of things to try to get people to understand, but some people still won't. It seems like it's just a matter of getting it done. In fact, earlier this week, Adam Schefter said on NFL Live that everybody knows what the numbers should be. It's just a matter of getting it done. So this seems, I'm not going to be presumptuous enough to say that a almost $200 million contract would be easy to sort of orchestrate, but it does kind of seem easy relative to the way everybody else tends to handle these things.
So it's pretty much, well, what do you think the strategy then is on the Dallas Cowboys side, on Jerry Jones' side?
I think that they still think that playing for the Cowboys holds an inherent level of value that isn't obtainable anywhere else, despite the fact that the most marketable player in the league plays in Kansas City, Missouri, and half the people in the world think that that's in Kansas, not in Missouri. And we see teams in Cleveland, that are Baker Mayfield, when he was on the Browns, was a worldwide household name. Now, some of that's that he won the Heisman Trophy and things like that, but I mean, still, Baker obviously played with CD. I mean, it isn't that world anymore, right? Like people aren't taking less to play for the Cowboys. And yes, there are amenities and there are pros that come along with it in terms of fame and adoration, but there are cons in that respect too. I mean, do a Twitter search for Dak Prescott's name and you will see the cons. And so I think that they really think that despite 100% of history, they can, quote unquote, win this negotiation. It's worth mentioning that they have lost these over and over and over again. Dak Prescott is a prime example. They pushed him to the limit and he shattered his ankle and still got the richest contract in franchise history. DeMarcus Lawrence is somebody who a lot of people think is overpaid, and he might be relative to what he offers. I think he's a very good player, but he got the contract that he did because they placed the franchise tag on him. He had a remarkable season. He obtained all this leverage. The Des Bryant deal that happened 9 years ago took until the 11th hour on the franchise tag deadline in the middle of July. He was on the tag that year. I mean, over and over and over again. Zach Martin a year ago. I mean, the Cowboys think that they can outwit, outlast, outplay like it's Jeff Probst on Survivor, these guys, and they can't. They lose, and they're going to lose with CD eventually. They're going to lose with Dak eventually. And the amazing thing is that they're on the verge of going down this, not even slippery, this like outright soaking wet slope with Micah Parsons as well, and allowing him to head into year 4, obviously, without an extension himself.
So is it just, do you think it's one of those things where it's like, well, like you said, everybody knows what the number is. They're going to have to pay him. That they're like, well, let's just wait and make sure that, I don't know, nothing happens. Like something weird happens. Like, I don't know, he slips and falls somewhere. And I don't know what else, because why else not do this unless you just, well, we know what the line is. We know we can get to here. So let's just wait it out and make sure that nothing weird happens in his camp before we give him all this money.
If I had to come up with a level of logic that is behind this, because I have a difficult time finding it true to be that there's any, but if there is a metronome beating of logic, so to speak, it's that they like the attention. That's the most logical conclusion to me, is that they, I mean, how many times have you seen, Josh Allen and Keon Coleman highlights this training camp period? None. Like how many times is that leading, first take or whatever? But how many times have people discussed this subject ad nauseum? And so I don't, a lot of people think that the Cowboys are that attention seekers, and I don't, I don't think that they're that way, the way I would think a lot of national perception is. But they are that way in some senses, that they are a horse or a zebra, I guess, that can't change all of their stripes. And so there's no question that they enjoy this. And the LOL thing, a few weeks ago now, or whatever, 10 days ago, whatever it was, I think that they like this. And I think that they're frugal. I think that they're cheap. And I think that they also, if you want to give them the smallest sense of defense, the long-term deals that they have done early have burned them. Now, that was with a running back in Zeke Elliott. That was with an off-ball linebacker in Jalen Smith. That was with a right tackle in Terrence Steele last year. That was with Trayvon Diggs, which was smart. And we patted them on the back. Hey, well done. You know, look at your star corner coming off his third year. You paid him. You did the smart thing. And then he tore his ACL. You know, so I do think there's a little bit of like, man, every time we touch this stove, we burn our hands, you know. But again, you're touching the stove. We're not asking you to touch the stove. We're asking you to, you know, touch the parts of the oven that aren't hot. So they're using this weird warped logic to justify their lack of activity.
All right. Well, I mean, and look, it's not like these agents don't know the track record either. So they know that they have all of the control at this point, or at least it would appear. So, and then Dak, speaking of Dak, will Dak be here for the long term? Do you think he gets his next biggest and maybe the last biggest contract?
I don't think it'll be last. At the very least, in terms of his time in the NFL, maybe the third extension won't be with Dallas. I mean, just given everything to this point, but I mean, he's only 31 years old, and I would offer that this next one will probably be, you know, the reports from a few months ago were that it might be in the 3-year variety, which would certainly set him up for another potential, you know, kind of bite at the apple. But I do think this ultimately gets done. I think that the Cowboys, beyond their incompetence here, are extraordinarily fortunate that CD is the only one holding out, because Dak could totally hold out if he wanted to. Micah could hold out if he wanted to. It is an incredibly fortuitous thing for Dallas that CD is the only one choosing not to be at training camp right now. And they have already benefited from the grace of Dak Prescott, and that this is the third time, at least the third, you know, middle of August, that they are pushing Dak into a contract year. They did it in 2019, the final year of his rookie deal. They obviously sent him into his franchise tag season in 2020, the one where he was injured. And they were on the verge of doing it in 2021 before the July 15th deadline when they negotiated the deal that he's currently on. So you're talking about 3 times now that they have sent him into the summer on the final year of his contract with the team. And not just, this isn't, you know, no disrespect to Kyler Murray, but to use him as an example, this isn't a number 1 overall pick that has disappointed relative to expectation. Sure. This is a 4th round lotto ticket that has been a dream ambassador for you off of the field, is a remarkable human being, on top of being a highly productive player who finished second in MVP voting last year. And again, he's coming off of his best statistical individual season as well. So it is extremely difficult to justify their positioning here. Maybe you put some level of stock into, well, you can't get it done to the playoffs if you're somebody like that. But I would offer, can Josh Allen get it done in the playoffs? Can Justin Herbert get it done in the playoffs? Can, you know, whatever the case may be, we can go round and round and round here. So I do think this ultimately gets done. I think that they still believe they can win, whether it's years, whether it's guaranteed money, whether it's whatever. But it's also worth mentioning, and I'm sorry to be long-winded on these things, that they lost in every single capacity when it came to the last extension. They lost on the time length they wanted. They lost on the guaranteed money. They lost on the annual average value. And the lesson that they can't understand is people say things like, you can't give Dak $60 million a year. You just can't do it, whatever. But the verbiage was, you can't give him $40 million 3 years ago. And I mean, now $40 million, like that is chump change for a franchise quarterback. And that's what this will ultimately become. And they're so unwilling to trust that at some point you have to be the one to set the market, and that soon enough everybody will fall in line behind you.
Yeah, because isn't he like the last quarterback waiting for a contract? I'm not sure. There might be another one out there, but
they let everybody beat him this offseason and now preseason period. Jared Goff obviously got his bag from Detroit. Trevor Lawrence got it from Jacksonville. Jordan Love in Green Bay, and even Tua obviously in Miami. And at wide receiver, they've let everybody beat them. Now, some of those were maybe a tier below the Devontae Smith, the Jalen Waddle. Those deals, you know, those were never price points that CD was going to agree to. But they let the Justin Jefferson deal get done. The only one that's lingering that they could beat still is the Jamar Chase deal. And I suppose Brandon Ayuk, if you think that he's ultimately going to touch CD lane money.
Okay. All right. Wow. A lot going on. Big surprise. And maybe, like you said, it does make a lot of sense that this is just what Jerry wants. So us talking about this for the first 15 minutes instead of just talking about the rest of the team. But anyway, and you would think that at some point that if they weren't satisfied or they were questioning whether or not Dak might not be here, that they would have drafted a quarterback at some point in the second round, third round, fourth round, just in case. And there's nobody. They don't have. I mean, I don't think they think Cooper Rush is the answer. So Trey Lance.
Well, I would offer that people think and suggest that Trey Lance is the answer. At least they did before Sunday's preseason outing against the Rams. But the difficulty, even if you want to wander down that trepid path, is that this is the final year of Trey Lance's rookie contract. So even if you presume that they go through the whole season and that Dak walks in free agency to the Raiders or the Giants, the Titans or whoever, now you've sat down with Trey Lance, who understands and knows that he's your only option.
Now he's got leverage.
It's not quite the same leverage, but
Sure.
it's the same level of stupidity in assigning it, which is what they're guilty of over and over and over again, whether it's Dak and CD now, Micah in the future, DeMarcus Lawrence in the past, Zeke Elliott when he forced it, Zach Martin a year ago when he forced it. They just have an inability to get ahead of these things the way that other front offices are.
Well, and that kind of coincides with the fact that they still have this bad playoff record going on now for a long time. And eventually you would hope that it's going to come to an end. Do they have the right guy? Did the fan base feel that Mike McCarthy is the right guy?
You know, a year ago, I'm very fortunate to have people like you ask me to kind of preview the Cowboys season. And the question I got a lot was, and I still get, is does Mike McCarthy have to reach the NFC Championship game to keep his job? And the answer I gave a lot last year that I won't give this year is, well, how does he miss it? Right? Like, is it a game-winning field goal that like clangs off the upright? Do they get blown out? Like, like the context of what happened, or if they get there, do they get there because of a weird penalty or something like that? Like, because then we would call it hollow. So the context really mattered. And as the season went on, I really just kind of became, I would offer maybe Mike's biggest defender. In case anyone isn't aware, the Cowboys have won double-digit games 3 years in a row. That hasn't happened since the heyday of the 90s. They've been a playoff team 3 years in a row. That hasn't happened since the heyday of the 90s. Those aren't things that you hang banners for, and those are things that if they happen to other franchises, I think they would be regarded as, being among the better teams in the NFL if that were the case. But this team lives in an extraordinarily large shadow and is fighting the past, and obviously nobody will let them forget that. That being said, the way they lost, I always said, as we kind of went down the stretch, that McCarthy had to return unless things went truly, off script in the playoffs. And they did. And so my position after they lost was, you got to move on at this point in time. Now they didn't, and that is what it is. He's also entering a contract year. So you've got this added level of drama. I mean, this added level of unnecessary drama. His whole staff is in a contract year, including Mike Zimmer, who's a brand new addition to it. But that being said, there's only a single team in the NFL that has won more regular season games than them over the last 3 years. And that isn't meant to be like, cherry picking. He's been the coach for 4 years. And that first year, Dak Prescott broke his ankle. So I think sure, if we're willing to kind of understand that's a bit of a mulligan. So in terms of time he's had Dak for the majority of the time, he is one of the best coaches in the NFL in the regular season. And I know that the jokes write themselves in that sense. And you're trailing only Kansas City. They're better than Buffalo. They're better than Philadelphia. They're better than Baltimore, than Cincinnati, than the Rams, and all these teams, and they can't get it done in the playoffs. And it's amazing. I mean, it truly is confounding. And even within that, they've lost to two teams in the playoffs. One of them is quarterbacked by the dude who we all think is now like the future truth in Jordan Love, but we're not willing to give them any leniency for losing to this guy that we're anointing to be incredibly good for the foreseeable future. And the other is this would-be dynasty, if not for the Kansas City Chiefs, but we act like, well, they're these losers because they lost to the mighty San Francisco 49ers, which is kind of amazing, when you break it down that way. I do think that there's, people look at like the Bills and they give them this pass of like, well, they just keep running into the Chiefs and like, that's okay. Well, these are their Chiefs, they're just not winning the Super Bowl. And so, I mean, I say all that to say, I trust Mike McCarthy. And my last part of this diatribe is, and I would ask you if you agree, if Nick Sirianni said, I'm going to take over play calling, and the Eagles offense soared, the exposés that would be written in the offseason would be insane. It'd be Nick Sirianni identified a problem. He, attacked it and he was correct. Mike McCarthy said, you know what? This offense that was very, very, very good. I mean, in fact, it was the best in the NFL in many metrics under Kellen Moore's supervision. He said, I think this can be better. and he dismissed Kellen Moore. And everybody said, well, you know what, Kellen, he's going to light the world on fire with the Chargers. And I know that they had injuries and things like that,
Sure,
but that did not happen. No. And beyond that, what happened was Mike was right. CD had the best individual season of his career. Dak had the best individual season of his career. They were on fire on offense. And have you seen anyone give him any semblance of credit for that? I understand he's an easy target because he lost a PR battle to Aaron Rodgers many moons ago, but he deserves an enormous amount of credit for that in my mind. We magnify his mistakes. Does anybody talk about the fact that Dan Campbell blew a 17-point lead in the NFC Championship game? No. Does anybody talk about that Kyle Shanahan quite literally did not know the way that overtime rules worked in the Super Bowl? No. But people talk about the fact that Mike McCarthy lost at home as a 2 seed to the Green Bay Packers in the wild card round. Like, that's the most criminal offense that anybody can ever have. So I think it's such a weird juxtaposition. And if it's not obvious, these things have gotten, really contested over the offseason because of how volatile things have been. I would offer that I think Mike's the answer for the job, or the right guy for the job, to answer your kind of original question. In something that he said in their first press conference after they lost to the Packers, he was asked about the history that this team is fighting and everything that they're kind of dealing with, and he said, "We offer no apologies for the drought that this team is in." He said, "We are responsible for our time here. We will totally take responsibility for that." But I mean, he didn't outright say this, but he's not responsible for the fact that Jason Garrett failed for a decade, or that Tony Romo bobbled a snap in Seattle, or that Patrick Creighton ran the wrong route against the Giants in the divisional round, or that Romo and Witten went to Cabo the week before that game. But, I think that disposition has been necessary because so many people are concerned with the legacy of this franchise and the history of this drought and all the failures that they've become associated with, and that UConn has more playoff wins in their building than they do. I mean, it's just a wild time to kind of be here, and he's the right guy for that job. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that he is going to finish the job, because it's the most difficult thing to do.
And all of this pressure, that's really the biggest obstacle to get over come playoff time, isn't it? You can say all you want about what Mike McCarthy, he's got a Super Bowl, but he's lost a lot of big playoff games. Dak can't win the big one, but it's just exasperated so much more with the fact that there's this big monkey hanging all over the franchise when it comes to playoffs at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, their only playoff win under Mike McCarthy was over the Buccaneers, and anytime you bring that up, it's they were the below $500. Who cares? I mean, does anybody, that is true, but okay, well, again, just to keep it in division, Nick Sirianni's 2 playoff wins were over the, awful Daniel Jones, Brian Daboll Giants, and the literally quarterbackless 49ers. I understand that they almost won the Super Bowl, but they didn't. I mean, if we look at it, the Bills had a playoff win last year against the Steelers. And we sit here and act like it's this, this like skin on the wall, wow, they beat the Steelers. True. Even the Bills a year ago, before they got waxed by the Bengals, they beat the Dolphins, and they almost lost. And not the Tua Dolphins, not even, anybody else's Dolphins, the Skylar Thompson Dolphins. Yep. They barely hung on to beat them. And we act like, well, they've got 5 playoff wins over the last whatever year. So it's super impressive. But we bag on this because of, and you're right. And look, there are a lot of pros that come with wearing the logo of the franchise on your polos and your caps and your helmets, and a lot of opportunities. But there's a lot of context that goes out the window as well. And my job is just to kind of apply that. I mean, they deserve their criticism, don't get me wrong. But the idea that they're these oafs and these losers, and that they're just accomplishing nothing, and that their schedule's weak or whatever. Again, people will in the same breath say, oh, well, they play nobody in the regular season, and then hoist up the Eagles like they're this, amazing superpower of a team. It's just an amazing time.
Well, that's a good time for us to take a look at this year's team, because I think this is the one top team that when we look at all of these contenders and what kind of offseason they've had, it's like, did the Cowboys know there was an offseason? That's what the outside perspective is what are they doing? I mean, have they made little moves here and there, but this is the Cowboys we're talking about. Was that the strategy? What happened to them this offseason? What was it? They didn't have any money. Even the draft. What are they doing? A running back? There's a lot of questions.
I mean, I've already been incredibly long-winded, and it's not possible to explain. Now, I do think it was exacerbated by the all-in thing that just has not gone away. And, and I will say, I mean, for what my opinion is worth, this is probably the most, this is probably the lowest stock that they've held nationally as far as people's perception of their football operation. Everybody recognizes they're a worldwide brand. The other day, Mike Greenberg was on McAfee calling them cheap. You know what I mean? Like those things haven't happened. And I do think that they were magnified, but ironically, by the all-in comment, right? Like, you say we're going to be all in, and then you do nothing, and you know, you set yourself up to be this easy target. And it's quite frankly stupid, because you talk about, did they have any money? Of course they had money, and they could have generated money by extending Dak or CD or Micah even, and they chose not to do those things. The running back thing, I am so grateful to Zeke Elliott for the good times. We've all had a blast, you know, throughout the course of his career. But this is kind of I think people think of Jerry Jones as this maverick, as this, he'll go sign anybody, when that hasn't been the case for a very long time. The last notable free agent who the Cowboys signed at the opening of the window was Brandon Carr in 2012. And they felt like that burned them, even though he was a really productive player for them. He just wasn't prime Deion Sanders, and that was a problem for them. And so ever since then, they have shied away from the initial windows of free agency. But even then, you know, they weren't all too active in the secondary market or the third market, because their primary, they're like notable. If you put a poster boy on who they signed in free agency, was Eric Kendricks, which A, was incredibly predictable based on his history with Mike Zimmer, but B, he agreed to terms with the 49ers before he agreed to terms with the Cowboys and ultimately signed with Dallas. So yeah, he chose Dallas over them eventually. I don't know if state income tax or whatever silly thing was a part of that, but I mean, it wasn't even a player who they negotiated with originally and you know, with full integrity by themselves. It took having a deal with somebody else. And so I have a very difficult, it feels lazy and it feels comfortable. The Zeke Elliott thing feels along those lines. I think it's important context that they were talking about Zeke, and not just like in hidden reporting or things like that, like in press conferences before the draft. They obviously didn't have a 4th-round draft pick because they had sent it for Trey Lance a year ago, and that was kind of the target range. And we did ultimately see that in the draft. That was where the run on the running backs went, outside of the top dudes, obviously. But so it was understood, if you want a guy, they had 2 third-round picks after the trade down in the 1st round. You're going to have to take one on Friday night because you don't have a 4th-round draft pick. They took Maris Leafau, the linebacker out of Notre Dame. And the moment, quite literally, that they could, they brought Zeke back. It was before 6 a.m. the Monday after the draft, the day that players brought in no longer impacted the compensatory formula, that it was reported by ESPN and NFL Network that what they had been basically saying was a fact was indeed finally true. And of course, they bring him back and he wears 15. They could sell all these brand new jerseys. Like, again, the jokes just write themselves. But I would offer that same level of comfortability has kind of existed at all levels of their operation this year. The Mike Zimmer thing appears to be taking, and players seem to be gravitating towards him, and I'm grateful for that. But the only other 2 reported candidates who they interviewed in the year 2024 for the vacant defensive coordinator position were Rex Ryan and Ron Rivera. That was it. Like, those are the 3 names. Like, and it just seemed like this joke to me. Like, and for what it's worth, Mike Zimmer was the first reported name that they were interested in. And initially there was this kind of blowback from people like, what are you doing? This is crazy. And then it was, well, we also want to talk to Ron Rivera and Rex Ryan. And then people were like, oh my gosh, Mike Zimmer's a god. Like, you better get this Zimmer thing done now.
Perspective.
And again, and this may work. It may be fine. It may be legitimate. That does not justify the process. It does seem like he's a name. We know he's already in the HR system. We don't have to have him fill out the new reporty paperwork. And the same goes for Zeke Elliott. The Zeke thing completely and totally looks like they wanted him back the moment they cut him, but they obviously had to let the natural course of things play itself out. So they brought him back again, as noted, the very second that they could. So they like their points of comfort, and that's kind of what the offseason was about.
And matter of fact, let's take a look, give you some time to catch your breath, which I love. Let's take a look at the depth chart. We'll start on offense. So, all right. So, because here's the thing too, and it's a deep running back field. So give me, I mean, this idea of Rico Dowdle being the starting running back for the Cowboys, and I know that's probably not the case. I mean, Zeke, why else get him, right? I mean, when it's all said and done, if they don't make any moves, is it going to be a shared backfield between Dowdle and Elliott?
I have a difficult time believing that personally. Now, 2 years ago, Zeke's last season on the team, was I don't know if you had any shares of Tony Pollard in fantasy football that year, but that was the Tony Pollard year, obviously.
Yeah.
And he was, maybe outside of Christian McCaffrey, the most explosive running back in the NFL in 2022. And the Cowboys still justified over 200 carries for Zeke. Think about think about giving a non-Christian McCaffrey Niners running back 200 carries. It's just impossible. It's impossibly dumb to say out loud, but they did it. And so I say that to say, if that version of Tony Pollard could not force Zeke off of the field, all due respect to Rico Dowdle or to Malik Davis or Deuce Vaughn or Royce Freeman, they don't stand a snowball's chance in hell. And maybe the number isn't 200. Maybe they are willing to slice a little bit off of Zeke's plate. But I fully expect him to touch the ball 150 times this year. This idea that they're bringing him back to just, be a pass protector, goal line dude. Just again, if you find these things to be notable, they gave him the superstar treatment in the first preseason game. No shoulder pads, no nothing, just jersey over, natural body, and sitting alongside Dak Prescott on the sidelines.
Well, I guess the interesting thing though is how old is he? He's 28.
He is, I believe, 28, but this is his 9th NFL season. So, I mean, he's touched the ball a lot.
Yeah, he's like Mixon in a way, is that they're right around the same age, and yet you think that they're older because they have been around in the league so much. But the key is the wear and tear. That's what it is. But the last couple of years, he really hasn't. I mean, in his time away from the Cowboys, he hasn't really had much production, so maybe that's a good thing. Maybe he's kind of got a second wind, maybe.
I mean, I think he's a football player that can help their team. Like, I don't mean to say like this is a worthless type of thing, but the idea that he can be your lead back is
that's different.
It's preposterous to me. And now they, drafting him 4th overall, giving him a $90 million contract extension, that's one end of the spectrum. Like, that's way too far, that you need to go as far as investing in the running back position. Now, people love to talk about running backs don't matter, blah, blah. There's definitely a happy medium here, but we've gone to the other end of the spectrum now. Like, you can't have nobody there. Like, you can't truly have just random people, random human beings. There's a happy medium there that they just seem, to have an aversion to right now.
Well, do you think, that's the thing with running backs, though. There's so many good running backs that seem like they're in bad situations in the NFL. They're second string, third string. If they were on another team, as a Jet fan, I can just look at the Jets and I say, well, wait a second. They just drafted 2 running backs. They have Breece Hall, and they got a kid out of Anaconda who's not bad for a young prospect. That's a pretty deep backfield, and I'm just talking about my team. So there are running backs out there that might be a 3rd or a 4th on another team that could easily be a number 2 on the Cowboys. So do you think that's possible? That number 2 guy is probably, or maybe even the shared number 1 guy probably isn't even on the Cowboys yet?
Yeah, I think so. A name that everybody talks about a lot is Dameon Pierce in Houston. You mentioned Joe Mixon, obviously that backfield, a little more crowded now, obviously. Like, maybe there is a roster casualty somewhere else, or a guy that is going to be a roster casualty that they work out some sort of trade for. Obviously watching Hard Knocks this time of year, you remember Khalil Herbert's in Chicago, right? Like, any one of these dudes, are guys who you could see coming in.
That's a good one.
Yeah, Anaconda. Like, pick your Jets running back at this point. Like, honestly, any one of them. And that's where, like, I mentioned fantasy, but like, had the Cowboys walked away with, I know he's a bit banged up at the moment, but like Marshawn Lloyd, just to pick one of the rookies.
Okay.
He would be like the RB10 in fantasy drafts, right? Because of the perceived opportunity. Yes. And if they had that guy, like that arbitrary name that we could assign some legitimacy to, I think we would feel a lot better about this. But because they have this just kind of, charcuterie board of options instead of like an actual meal that they ordered, it feels a little bit wonky.
All right. And is there, out of all those no-name running backs, is there someone there that you say, I think he deserves a shot?
Maybe Rico Dowdle would be that guy.
He would be that guy?
I suppose. But he's a bit long in the tooth, relatively speaking here. It just, it feels like if it was going to happen for him, it would have happened already.
Okay.
And so maybe if Zeke weren't on the team, maybe I could, really kind of squint my eyes and see it happening. But it's just difficult to see him having enough opportunities to kind of get enough momentum going.
All right. And right now, there's no rumors out there about a specific player.
No, I mean,
Okay.
it was always Zeke, and I personally have a difficult time seeing them bring in somebody that is going to threaten that because they love him a lot.
All right, wide receiver. Now, this is also important. Of course, we got the Lamb stuff out of the way. Cooks. Oh, he's just at this point in time, he's really he's a consummate professional receiver. He's just nice veteran guy. May not be the game breaker he once was, but solid. Tolbert's the key here, isn't he? Isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he's had a great camp, but I was skeptical of this just because his third season, he really kind of failed to live up to proper expectations in 2022. Now, to be fair to him, that was the year that they traded Amari, so they kind of forced these massive expectations on him, and he just didn't live up to them. And it's difficult to do that as a rookie. But yeah, I mean, they're kind of counting on him to take a step, and it seems like he has. It seems like he's really modeled himself after Brandon Cooks and that professionalism you talked about, and so he seems to have the highest level of chemistry with Dak Prescott right now, in the sense that like anytime Dak goes anywhere to throw, Tolbert is on that trip. Tolbert is doing. Okay. I mean, he's your dream of a work ethic, and so cool. He's great. It's difficult to nail who's wide receiver 4 right now. If I had to pick a guy with the inside track, it's probably Jalen Brooks. He's popped and he's had great moments. Saw some action last year as a rookie. He was a 7th-round draft pick out of South Carolina. But other than that, I mean, I think they'll probably carry 6, and I think that one of them is Kevontae Turpin because of what they think he offers in the return game. Obviously, we have no total idea of what that's going to be. Maybe the offering is different than it's been in the past. That's part of what's exciting about this new world. And if I have to pick one more, Tyron Billy Johnson has had his moments. David Durden has had some times as well, but I think I'd probably, if I had to pick a different name, go with Jalen Cropper. He's just kind of had the most consistency so far throughout camp, so that would be my 6. But I would not be opposed as well to bringing in another body to be number 6 with Jalen Tolbert and Kevontae Turpin as your 4th and 6th.
Yeah, and that just happens to be another position that is usually pretty deep on other teams. And you just mentioned one of them, Houston. I mean, if Dallas wanted to make a deal with Houston, they could just go, all right, Pierce and one of your receivers, let's make a move. Because Houston's got, like, I just finished talking to Cole Thompson about Houston. They got like 8 or 9 guys they got to worry about trying to figure out how they're all going to fit on the team. Cowboys have 3. And maybe 4.
My prediction along those lines is that there is a Texans receiver that will be playing for the Cowboys next year in Stephon Diggs, who's obviously in the final year of his current deal. Do a quick Google search if you'd like. The Diggs brothers have been extraordinarily vocal about wanting to play together at some point in their careers. And from a timeline perspective, the most logical outcome is Stephon playing with Trayvon in Dallas, especially if Brandon Cooks walks after this year or whatever the case may be. Like, you could totally see, things kind of working that way. And so that's where I think things are probably headed in the future, because Trayvon's going to be around for the foreseeable future. And so it just kind of makes natural sense, because CD will, hopefully have that extension done by then, and be the established alpha, and Stephon can kind of come be what Brandon Cooks has been. He's just a little bit behind Cooks as far as that kind of timeline goes.
Okay, and Ferguson, of course, is in good shape. Is Schumacher, is he ready, do you think, to live up to that second round status?
He's been incredibly disappointing. He's had injury after injury after injury. And so, I mean, he's obviously making the team because of his draft status from just a year ago. But he complicates the position because you have to carry him. And Peyton Hendershot's kind of been the reliable secondary option outside of Jake Ferguson. But John Stevens Jr. is this incredible vertical threat, incredible red zone threat that was really taking off last year in the preseason, but he tore his ACL in the same game that DeMarvion Overshown did. And so Dallas is really, really high on him. Maybe those are your 4. Maybe they feel like carrying Peyton Hendershot. Maybe they're comfortable with 3. I can't imagine that, especially if they do want to try to run the ball a little bit differently this year. But yeah, Luke Schoonmaker has been disappointing to say the least.
So sounds like Stevens is a little bit of a sleeper.
I mean, I don't know that I would say that in like a fantasy sense. Like this isn't like Julius Thomas popping off out of nowhere or anything like that.
Okay.
But he's a name that has had success. It hasn't been quite the same to camp or in camp to this point as it was last year. Like last year was like every day he was making the play.
Okay.
But they were very, very excited about him entering this year, given that they lost him a year ago to the torn ACL.
Okay. Well, I mean, maybe it's not surprising then that he's getting off to a slow start this year due to that injury. So maybe next year's the year. Okay. Offensive line. So you talked about Guyton, and they look like they're set there on the left side, and Martin's at right guard. But the other two spots. So the big one is at center. Well, Brock Hoffman, is he definitely the starter?
Lately, they've been giving reps to Cooper Beebe, who's their third-round rookie. Now, he's the pick that they netted in the trade down in the first round with Detroit. They picked up an extra third rounder that became Cooper Beebe. Played guard at Kansas State primarily, but they liked him as a center, and they've been giving him first-team reps. And it does kind of feel like they're ripping the Band-Aid off. I'm 100% confident that Guyton will be the starter week one. I'm 100% confident that Cooper Beebe will start the majority of games at center. I don't know if they'll be, willing to go out to Cleveland week one. With that being the case, maybe that takes about a month or something to kind of hold. But the fact that they're giving him first team opportunities now is really significant. So that could happen as well. I think a lot of fans are excuse me, kind of ready to see that. Just go ahead, throw the rookies to the wolves. Let's see both Guyton and Beebe, starting week one.
Okay. And then Steele, he seems to be, a solid depth guy. Is he definitely the right tackle? And talk about any other guys on the bench that are worth mentioning.
Yeah. I mean, he's the starting right tackle, and I think he's probably better than his kind of internet reputation would suggest.
Okay.
He's he's an undrafted free agent in 2020. Like he's been a well over positive return on investment in terms of what they've done, but they did give him a massive extension a year ago. He might be playing for his 2025 job, but he's definitely the starter, at right tackle in 2024. In the aftermath of the Chuma Edoga injury, they don't really have a true and proper swing tackle option. Now, I think you could be really skeptical about offensive line depth for maybe every team. But Chuma was supposed to be that guy and may very well be that guy when he returns from this toe situation. And on top of that, Earl Bostic, who's obviously here as well, flew back to Dallas on Thursday to have surgery for his own injury. So the Cowboys did sign Cole Cabral in the aftermath of the Edoga injury. So that's kind of one goes up, one comes down, but they might need another body, presuming Earl Bostic is going to miss some time, which would stand to be the case given that he's about to have surgery. So I would imagine they'll bring in another tackle option. Matt Waletzko has not been very good. He was the player that they got in the fifth round, or with the fifth round pick they got in the Amari Cooper trade. And he's just been, kind of a dude. That's kind of who everybody else is here as far as options are concerned. It's just a bunch of dudes. And so it's difficult to feel like they have that sixth man off the bench.
So while the starting unit might be solid, if there's any sort of injury issues there, they could be in big trouble.
Exactly.
Okay. And by the way, Edoga, again, as a Jet fan, I always thought there was something else there with him myself. I mean, I always felt that he deserved a shot. And he's now bouncing around a little bit. So I hope he gets healthy and maybe he finds a team to latch onto, and maybe this is it. So any chance that he could be the 2025 right tackle?
I really doubt it. I think at that point, they'd be entering kind of a new era with, Tyler Smith would be kind of your elder statesman. Tyler Guyton would be in his second year, and Cooper Beebe, right? You have, 3 of your 5 set. Maybe Zach Martin walks. That might be the most important priority. He retires and you've got to find a new right guard, but they might be looking at reshaping the entire right side of the offensive line next year.
And before we move on to the defensive side, Flournoy and Thomas, the other 2 draft picks on this side, you haven't mentioned them. So I guess.
Yeah, Thomas hasn't popped at all. Maybe a practice squad guy, and Flournoy, every receiver aside from the major ones has kind of had a day. Like there's been like a Tyron Billy Johnson day, a Jalen Cropper day. Flournoy had an injury at the beginning of camp, but he hasn't really had a day yet. Now, for the most part, receivers that the Cowboys draft make the 53-man roster. Jalen Brooks, 7th round draft pick last year.
Okay.
I mean, maybe Flournoy is a practice squad guy. He's had a slower ramp up than most draft picks do on this team.
And by the way, Richards, he was a 5th round draft pick last year, that's just
4th.
Another guy that just hasn't developed.
Yeah, he's just been maybe fifth. I guess I'm misremembering that, but obviously I trust you all. But I mean, he's just been a guy, that's, they've been fortunate that they kind of have obvious, supplements whenever they do have injuries or things like that. But he hasn't had any real opportunities. I mean, he could be a candidate, I suppose, to be that proper swing tackle, or maybe that right guard of the future in a Zach Martinless world. But to date, he's just kind of been hanging out.
Okay. Let's move on over to the defensive side. And up front, talked about Williams. That's a big loss. So, yeah, Nealand. How ready do you think he is at this point in time to be because at this point, is he like the number 3 guy, the first edge rusher off the bench?
Yeah, especially in the aftermath of the Sam Williams injury. I think Marshawn Nealand is probably the best new addition on the team. Now, I recognize that's not a long list, as we've talked about, but he has just, I mean, it is so clear that this dude is going to play at a high level for a long time. I mean, he really kind of feels like DeMarcus Lawrence in that respect. So he's been awesome. And I would offer that if the Cowboys are going to play Micah Parsons off the ball a little bit more or at all, that obviously, involves Nealand playing at a high level. And so he's the last point of, I think, of comfortability that people have from a pass rushing standpoint. Although with Carl Lawson now on the team, that conversation changes a little bit.
Yeah, Lawson's a real tough one to figure out because he didn't really get a chance last year with the Jets. And I understand why, because he was coming back from the injury and they were deep at that position. So maybe this is, again, another situation where he's another year removed from an injury. And then maybe this is the year that he gets back to being more like the guy he was, because he's not old, but because he's right now he's in the prime of his career. So the Cowboys feel like, I mean, do you feel like it's possible that maybe they get something, maybe they're lucky here and they get a little juice from Carl Lawson this season?
In a weird way, they've caught lightning in a bottle several times here. When they signed, as an example, Dante Fowler, I just thought like, oh, this is just, I mean, Dan Quinn knew him in Florida. Like, just because they go back to Gainesville, this is going to work out. And it kind of did. Like, he was a great rotational piece for them. I mean, if you want to get real off the wall, when they signed Aldon Smith, that happened on April Fool's Day. That felt like there's no way that this actually could have some legitimacy. And it did.
Yeah.
Now it's a new defensive coordinator and whatnot, but I'm with you. I kind of like the buying low a year removed from the chaos, so to speak. I would assume that they look at it and say, oh, I would totally rather have Carl Lawson at this price point than Bryce Huff at what the Eagles paid. And that might be true. I mean, in a literal sense, if things kind of work out that way. So I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt here. I mean, if they had signed Carl Lawson in April, I think we do backflips. It's just how we got here that kind of muddies the perception of everything.
Yeah, that's a great point. By the way, speaking of Zimmer, as we talk about the interior, a big hope is that they can fix what was a weakness, the run defense and the middle of the defense. Is that really the priority? One of the major issues that they need to try to fix if they're going to be a legitimate defense?
Yeah, I mean, they've been talking about that since they lost to the 49ers in the playoffs the first time in the wild card round at AT&T Stadium. They just have not been able to stop the run. And it was, a real problem for them down the stretch last year. We all remember the Green Bay game, but they got waxed by Miami. They got waxed by Buffalo, especially Buffalo. James Cook ran all over them. Yeah. They're just not a tough team in that respect. And so a lot of it is kind of relying upon Mozzie Smith taking a step in year 2. But I would say that the expectation there is really low. And some of it is not Mozzie's fault. Some of it is Taco Charlton's fault, right? Like, people are just convinced that a Michigan Wolverine can't, hit for the Cowboys up front.
Okay.
But Mozzie has been disappointing. And if he doesn't take a leap in his second season, it's just going to be more of the same. Now, some of it, I think, is mitigated by the fact that, Dan Quinn was so light defensively, playing all these linebackers or safeties at linebacker and just having no beef to be able to stop any of the run. I mean, go back to that Packers playoff game and look how often the Packers are in 12 personnel. I mean, they're just pushing everybody around because they can. So they're a little bit heavier, obviously. And I think that they think that that's going to help things out, but it does ultimately start and end with, up front and Mozzie Smith.
And then Rodgers being a 7th round pick, and they just traded for Jordan Phillips. So any hope there that's going to help them out depth wise?
I think that Phillips is probably the name that they're hanging their hat on the most. just because the Cowboys had a great option over the last 2 years in Jonathan Hankins, who was also a trade acquisition for them, but he followed Aiden Dirty to the Seattle Seahawks this year. They need that veteran leadership. They need that veteran depth. Osa Odighizuwa is a great defensive tackle. He's playing in a contract year for what it's worth. And you can kind of trust him to handle things, but you still need that run stuffer. You still need that dude. And I think a lot of people think that the Jordan Phillips trade is indicative of a lack of faith in where Mozzie's at in camp to this point. I think it's more about just raising the floor. I mean, they really need more bodies, and they really need people they can trust. And Jordan Phillips definitely checks that box, especially for the low cost that it was to get him.
You know, as a Michigan fan, I'll say this about Mozzie. I don't know. I wonder whether or not it's about making sure he's in the right defensive scheme too. I don't know if this is the right fit for him, to tell you the truth. He's a difficult player to read sometimes, and I don't know. That's just me. I never looked at him as Mozzie is one of those. Hey, put him in the middle of the defense, and he's going to plug up that running game for you. I never looked at him like that, to tell you the truth.
I mean, Bruce Feldman came out with his freaks list a couple of weeks ago, and Bruce is awesome. Like, no, obviously, yeah. I read all of his work and support it, but I almost was like, I really don't care about this list anymore. like Mozzie has kind of ruined it for me. From the perspective of, I do think he's wildly talented and wildly athletic. Yeah. But you're right. Like, I don't think that he fits this specific requirement. But to be clear, I don't know that anybody fits this specific requirement. Like, what, hey, come be Aaron Donald. Like, that's the job. Come be, not even that, could be Fletcher Cox, like, which is a very difficult thing in and of itself. Come be, Haloti Ngata, whatever. But he just can't do that. And, because it's a very, very difficult thing to do.
Yeah. And it's maybe also, maybe he was overdrafted. It's that first round deal that,
I mean, again, the Cowboys shadow, they had not drafted a defensive tackle in the first round since 1991, and it was Russell Maryland. Oh. And so, like, you're the guy that they broke the seal for. You know what I mean? Like, so again, a lot of it isn't. And again, the Taco Charlton thing really soured. And despite the fact that Jordan Lewis is a wonderful player for the Cowboys, but a lot of people just feel like, oh, another defensive lineman from Michigan, not going to work, whatever, blah, blah.
I hear you. I know how that feels. I talk about it a lot around draft time, about that stigma of the jersey from the college, and how sometimes, and really, it just happens. It does. Not necessarily on a specific team in the NFL, but hey, man, those offensive linemen from that school, they never turn out in the NFL. So that's real. So I hear what the fans are saying. All right. Talk about the linebacking core now. So you talked about Kendricks is in, Overshown. How's he looking? And of course, you mentioned the third round draft pick that they got in return for that move. And of course, Clark was always a player. We talked about him last time, I believe, or last year, that he is someone that I always kind of liked, especially for a fifth round draft pick.
Yeah, well, he was coming off the kind of injury situation when they took him also in the fifth round, and he's really over-delivered, and he's really kind of become a great leader for them, which isn't shocking given that he wore 18 at LSU and all that jazz. Yeah. But Eric Kendricks has been great. Obviously knows Mike Zimmer well and what he wants to do, and is kind of the central nervous system of the defense now. So those are kind of your options. Overshown is somebody who they were very high on. Yep. Now I mentioned that they are moving away from playing safeties up at linebacker. It is worth acknowledging that Overshown was a converted safety at the University of Texas playing linebacker. So he's a little bit slighter in frame, compared to some of these other dudes. But that being said, he's so athletic. And I think they had such great and high hopes for him last year, obviously before he tore his ACL. And so he's been great so far, kind of on track to be that dude. I feel better about the linebacker core than I have in some time. There's no more Leighton Vander Esch, obviously retired over the offseason. I don't feel like Maris Liufau has really popped yet, but he's a third-round pick. I mean, whatever. Okay. For the most part, it's just kind of a ho-hum proposition there in the middle of Mike Zimmer's defense. But if you add Micah Parsons to the linebacker mix, obviously the conversation changes.
All right, that's true. And then secondary, not sure Deron Bland is going to be able to equal what happened last year, but it was quite a season for him. And of course, Diggs, it's really having both of those guys back there healthy. That's a couple of really interesting playmakers in that secondary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I know you're not doing this, but people try to explain away what DaRon Bland did the way they tried to explain away what Trayvon Diggs did, and try to, pick it apart, whatever. Since 2021, that same, kind of point of demarcation that we've used, Trayvon Diggs leads the NFL in interceptions, despite the fact that he only played 2 games last year. DaRon Bland is tied with Rasul Douglas for second on that list, despite the fact that he wasn't in the NFL until 2022. That's not pick sixes, obviously what DaRon Bland was kind of known for. It's just outright interceptions. Now, some of that is circumstantial, some of that is crazy, and some of that is impossible to explain, but it's also kind of, it's kind of like, I'm sure you're aware that no NFC East champion has repeated since 2004. And every time I bring that up every year, I say the same thing, and that like this means nothing, but it kind of doesn't mean nothing, right? I recognize that the 2005 Giants have nothing to do with the 2024 Commanders, but it's 20 years of history. Like it clearly is somewhat relevant. Yeah, like it's a non-zero level of value. And in a similar sense, that's how I look at this. Like you have 2 absolute ball hawks, and we were so excited last year to watch Trayvon play with Stephon Gilmore, and all due respect to maybe a future Hall of Famer, this might be a better version of that, and we just had no idea what it was. I mean, this is, I mentioned Brandon Carr. This is what the Cowboys envisioned when they signed him and traded up to get Morris Claiborne. Like this is the best outside corner duo the Cowboys have had in a very, very, very long time. The fact that they have a stable, savvy veteran, running nickel slot, and Jordan Lewis, a fellow Michigan man, is obviously a great thing. Kalen Carson, their 5th-round draft pick this year out of Wake Forest, has been awesome, and he appears to be another guy, another cut from the same cloth that DaRon Bland is. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Al Harris is kind of overseeing this entire operation, helping out. He got a promotion this past offseason. He is kind of the magic, sort of elixir here in many people's eyes. They did trade for Andrew Booth very recently. I would imagine he makes the roster. But Carson is that 4th guy right away, I think. Or not right away. He's played into that role. He's earned it, absolutely. So this is probably the place on the roster that I feel the highest level of comfortability.
By the way, I'm sure you're aware, you follow PFF.
Of course.
They don't seem to really agree with you with Jordan Lewis very much. They don't like Jordan Lewis, do they?
I mean, he's I've compared him to, and this is not a popular comparison, but Orlando Scandrick, in that he just will not go away. Like he will not die. Like he is just, and he's so football smart. Like he is one of the more underrated players in the NFL.
Wow.
On the subject of Michigan, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think it was on the Pivot, was asked about trash talkers and things like that, and he brought up Jordan Lewis. I'm not accusing Amon-Ra of anything, but plays in Detroit, well aware of the college football landscape, and he said, that corner for Dallas, I think his name's Lewis. It's like, his name. Like, relax. Like, Jordan Lewis is somebody who just gets under people's skin and will not go away. He has fought so hard and been such a great player for this team. I mean, he was a 2017 3rd-round draft pick. I mean, the fact that he's still hanging around is really, really impressive. And so I know that metrics may be what they are, but I trust him with my life. I mean, like, that's how highly I think of him.
Yeah, that's more important. That's why, I like using PFF as a tool. I always say that. It's just a tool, and it's right. Not the be-all, end-all. And I trust more is someone like yourself that actually watches every snap of every game and have been doing it since Jordan Lewis has probably been a Cowboy. So that's more important. Anybody else? Carson, by the way, the 5th-round draft pick, is he somebody that's
he's the new guy that's kind of rising the ranks. DaRon Bland obviously had the year he did last year, but he led the team in interceptions his rookie year as a 5th-round pick. And Carson feels, again, very similar to that. I know the way things work, but CJ Goodwin, for anybody who uses y'all's site, is a corner in name, but he's a special teams gunner. That's his thing. Like I think he's played like 5 snaps at corner in his entire career. Overall though, again, I feel very, very, very good about the state of the Cowboys cornerback situation. Eric Scott Jr. was obviously a player they drafted last year who they traded up to get in the 6th round, but it's kind of fallen behind Carson in the pecking order. It's difficult. It's very, very difficult to be underrated as a Cowboy, but I think that Trayvon Diggs and DaRon Bland have managed to do it.
By the way, we maybe a good suggestion I'll give them is maybe add like a section here on special teams for special teams players.
Matthew Slater is not a wide receiver. You know what I mean? Or wasn't a wide receiver.
Exactly.
Like something like that.
Yes.
So.
Oh, and by the way, you want to see great example of how important it is to not only intercept passes, but pick sixes are nice too. The top 100 list coming out and having Bland actually ahead of Sauce Gardner. Now, and again, I'm a Jet fan, but I know why that's done. And it's because that is the one thing that, to me, and I think to Sauce, is holding him back. He does not get a lot of interceptions. And
it's dumb.
Yeah, it is. He's awesome, but he's never going to be looked at as a really, like that marketably elite guy unless he starts picking off passes.
Mm-hmm. No, it's the way things go.
Yeah, and Bland has that. So, all right. And by the way, special teams, I don't talk too much about special teams when I have someone on, but the Cowboys have the kicking game situation is just really, really good. So,
I mean, Brandon Aubrey set the world on fire last year and has provided stability at the position in a way that hasn't been felt since the kind of heyday of Dan Bailey, and having him around is a pretty awesome deal.
Yeah. And then Turpin, this could be a big deal too with the new rule. I'm sure this is something the Cowboys are probably hoping is going to really give them a leg up to have someone like that back there, because it is something everybody. I haven't seen it yet in the preseason, and maybe they're holding back for some interesting designs for when the regular season starts. But everybody seems to think it's going to help if you have a good returner or two back there. So.
It's worth mentioning that John Fossil, Cowboys special teams coordinator, was among the group that pitched this and would seemingly have a more intimate, understanding of it than anybody else. And I trust him as well. So if they believe in Kevontae Turpin, and I'm anxious to see it in actuality.
RJ, thanks a lot as always. It was great talking to you about the Cowboys even before the season. Prediction?
They'll be in the mix. It'll be interesting. Yeah, I mean, I trust them to be a playoff team. I think they're among the short list of teams. What did Aaron Rodgers say? 8 teams or whatever that can win the Super Bowl. They're on that list. Whether they pull it off remains to be seen, but history would suggest that it probably won't happen.
Well, it's got to happen sometime. So we'll see whether or not it happens this year. RJ, we look forward to talking to you during the regular season at some point. And again, want to thank you. Don't forget to check out bloggingtheboys.com and also, of course, the podcasts, the videos, and so forth that we talked about at the beginning of the video. And we'll talk to you sometime soon.
Thanks for having me.
You got it.